going to be professionalism. So if you're a heavy drinker, you look sloppy, you're not clean in your kitchen, you're bossy or off-putting to other staff, you're arrogant, none of these star chef qualities like we see on TV are going to fit in the home. There's really no such thing. Your only goal is to ask that exact question of the clients that you're serving. What is it that they want? What type of environment do they want? Do they want me to be seen?
Welcome to the Private Chef Podcast, serving the 1%. I'm your host, Hannes Henche, and on our show we speak to the best chefs, how they honed in on their skills to excel in the industry, and what it takes to work as a private chef for some of the most exclusive clients in the world. Welcome back to the Private Chef Podcast. Today we have David Gonzalez with the Domestic Placement Network. He also has estatejobs.com in that, which is obviously everybody in the industry knows that one. So we're going to hear more about it, how he built both of those platforms out and his agency. Welcome to the show, David.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to the conversation, even though we had to reschedule a few times. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we made it. I'm glad we're here. So let's dive right in. How did you come to the private staffing industry in the first place? It's a bit of a niche industry. How did you end up here?
The fun part of that story is that a lot of people probably relate to it. I found the business completely at random. I was friends with someone who had a bit of a radio and television career, and I was not happy with the work I was doing up in New York and suggested, why don't I just move down to Florida? You've got plenty of space in your house. I will help you. I'll be your assistant and we'll grow your enterprise. And there I, by default, became a personal assistant with house management duties. So it was basically volunteering to work with a friend.
So how did you go from there, from volunteering to running your own businesses in this industry?
So good question. The second part of the journey was after about 3 years as a full-time 24/7 personal assistant, live in, got to travel around the world, really got steeped in the behind the scenes of the business. I had moved my employer to Los Angeles and just kind of winding down my position, started looking for something new. And I found out there was an entire small industry dedicated to finding these types of jobs. And that's how I found the agency side of the business, just stumbling upon an agency office that happened to be within about a mile of where I lived. So I started by working with another office before I went on my own about 6 months later. And that's when Domestic Placement Network began.
Why did you only stay for 6 months? Did you feel like you kind of knew your way around within 6 months, or what made you, or what encouraged you to go on your own within such a short period of time already?
It's a very, very important point. I think everything was going fairly well, and that may have been part of it. We didn't really have the correct partnership agreement in place from the beginning. So it was a little bit more technical that we decided that it just wasn't going to work going forward together. And I think that's a relevant point for private service and any business. We didn't really know exactly what it was going to be working together. So we decided in a shorter period rather than a longer time, it'd be better if we went our separate ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially if you see that the trajectory doesn't change. So what was that like for you? How did you build out your own company? And you need contacts on both ends to make this work. You need the families or the clients that can actually hire people. And then you also need kind of A players on the other end to fill those positions. What do you think was the hardest part in the early stage building your agency?
Well, you said it correctly. The game is, how do you get clients and how do you match skilled candidates to those clients? One of the greatest advantages I had was when I was partners in that original agency, I really pushed to work in cooperation with other agencies throughout the country, because I had seen that in other agency businesses, just in the regular corporate world, that certain agencies cooperated like real estate agents. When one has the listing, one has the client, they get together, they make the transaction work for everyone. So we had focused quite a bit on working with other agencies, especially when we had an out-of-state placement available, or they had a placement with a client near us and we knew the candidates. So I've really leaned heavily on those relationships to start the business. And that's pretty much the first thing that I did, was contacted people I had worked with from the original agency and said, we've decided to go on our own. I'm starting up a new firm and I would love to work with you. If I get a client and I don't have the candidates because I had to start from scratch, I'd love to work with you and do some placements. So that's how it began, was by participating with other agencies in cooperation. On the client side, it was very interesting because it was back in the early 2000s and the internet was still fairly new relative to operating a business. Email was pretty normal. Websites were up and coming. And what I discovered was, if I was going to be a small company handling a lot of data, I would have to use the internet more as a tool. And so I invested heavily in my own time and money to build out a website that had two things. Number one, good marketing, good SEO, and it was discoverable. So that's how it led to a lot of early clients. And then the second piece was that it was actually functional. So it was my application system, all digital from the beginning. Yeah. And that enabled me to work with a lot of candidates really quickly. And it was probably my first good pioneering move in a small business.
Yeah, I think especially coming out of an age where everything was kind of in person, or the other day I interviewed someone, he was telling me he was responding to an ad in a newspaper from an agency. And I was like, wow, that really kind of dates him. But it also is something I haven't heard of, because I'm definitely part of the digital age, and like your platform has always been there for people like me, as far as I'm concerned, and that dates me, I guess. But I think it was a great move to give that digital infrastructure and allow the candidates to, put in their information, because it probably immediately gave you a way bigger pool than other agencies could have gathered in the same time.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into why Estate Jobs was created. Initially, it was just the Domestic Placement Network agency website that had the application system. So the combination of having a number of candidates all available through digital with search capabilities, we had ways to screen and rate different candidates. It was really effective. The combination of that with working with other agencies, I started to try to develop a system of sharing candidates with other agencies and doing splits that way, almost like real estate listing, like I had said. Yeah. And that idea evolved into the Estate Jobs website, only because there was a technical limitation for something that I wanted to do. So I had to pivot a little bit, and I made it what it is today, which was just a straightforward job board. But it was originally created to be a networking site among agencies.
So did you also, so you basically allowed other agencies to use your platform too, and they had their own access to it and saw your candidates too?
That's correct. That was probably the big risk and sacrifice that I made to launch Estate Jobs. At the time, I had probably about 4,000 registered candidates through the agency, which was pretty extensive relative to the paper files I had seen at the other business and the number of people we could actually handle. And I started a rudimentary filing system that we entered some key data on the computer so we could search quickly, but it was very difficult to manage. So that was the base of how I got Estate Jobs started. Was I thought, look, if I don't have jobs for all of these people, I would love for them to be in the marketplace and connect with the other agencies that might have a job. And that was really the exact motivation for it, was how do we connect all candidates to all potential opportunities and vice versa. That was the reasoning behind it. I knew it was going to happen at some point, and since I needed it to operate my agency searches, that it just became obvious to me.
So from the perspective of market share, where does Estate Jobs stand today when you say you really want everybody to be able to connect? Do you have an idea how much maybe of the industry information it actually contains?
That's always been a mystery because there's not good industry data that could tell us how many employees there are, how many employers there are.
Yeah.
The best we can do is guess to an extent. We've tried to gather some of that data through the different associations that have formed here in the U.S. We've had some groups that attempted it and done some estimates. That's about the best you're going to get. So if I were to try to put a percentage number, I wouldn't have really, the numerator to put over the denominator in that equation.
Yeah. So for someone who's new to this industry, and I think people always think there is scarcity in the industry, but I feel like folks that been around for some time, like yourself and me to some degree, I never feel that way. I think it's a large pool, especially if people are willing to move. Would you say that's accurate? Like, how would you size this industry for someone who is just coming in?
So let's just start with the filter that when I'm commenting on the industry as a whole, it's mostly the United States. So we do some business international, but I don't have the direct data with all of Europe and the UK. So US based, there is always work. And in fact, I think we're at an all-time shortage of staff right now. The trend that we're seeing is professional level estate management is not just for the ultra high net worth families anymore. And it's actually pushing downstream a bit so that you have larger homeowners with complex service needs, complex technology, busy schedules, maybe a dual professional family, and they need help. Everything starts with housekeeping. Almost everyone is in need or has housekeeping help. And then it goes up the scale through personal assistant, home manager, estate manager for multiple properties, even if it's just a family with one main home and and a vacation property. That's a very complicated management system. So there's always work, and it's becoming more well recognized. The different types of jobs fluctuate, and some of the categories we feel like we've completely run out of skilled professionals. One of those right now is what we call a domestic couple. So husband and wife teams that are providing two of the professional level jobs in the home together. It's almost impossible to find that combination right now.
I think that makes sense. If I think about it, if I don't know many couples who share professions to that degree where they could even match as a domestic couple. I think in that sense, partnerships have changed. Which other of the professions in the house do you currently think are a shortage? And I will guess a little bit. I think anything that has to do with, like, for example, work involved, like if it's more handyman, estate manage, I think there's less of that. And that's just one of my guesses. And which other professions would you say right now are short?
You are 100% correct. And I think we're moving through generations of workers that it wasn't seen as a great career, or I don't know if it's a status issue or what it might be, but the more hands-on the jobs, the harder it is to find people with actual skills that are both knowledgeable and willing to do the work. So if you have housekeepers and housekeeping managers that are skilled professionals, it's very, very rare because it's just not a real recognized, viable career in the United States right now. Same thing with handyman and the trades. So a good electrician, a good plumber, a good painter, those are all people who just maybe are out on their own individually and doing great because the hands-on services are so in demand.
Yeah. So they're less likely. How about when it comes to nannies, butlers, chauffeurs, chefs? Do you think that there's an equilibrium in the market as much, or is there a slight shortage? At least my personal perception, I would say in 2021, it was like a staff-sided market where, you if you had a decent level of experience, I would say that you had a good chance of having choices where you could go.
I agree with you completely. The candidates that have had a very strong career, good longevity in at least a handful of their positions, were very, very in demand when hiring came back as COVID got a little bit more understood and people made decisions on how they wanted to use their homes, whether or not they wanted to travel. The service component was always there, but it came back very, very strong. And every agency partner I know was very busy, and it was hard to find really good qualified staff.
Yeah. Would you say that, given that at least the sentiment seems to be that we're already maybe in a recession, that there will be a pullback on hiring in our industry? And I mean, just this week, I think Facebook posted that they're laying off 11,000 workers. So there's a lot of layoffs happening in different segments of the market. Do you think that everybody is buckling up for bracing for impact, I would say, and that this eventually could affect our industry too?
I would say, just based on past trends and similar events, out of that 11,000 at Facebook, I don't think there will be one layoff of a person that can afford these types of services. It's just a guess, but we're talking about extremely high net worth positions and wealth levels that are having full-time staff at their homes. So does the economy affect that group? Not as much. Definitely not as much. Sometimes if there's a major event like the 2008 crash, things definitely slowed down. But it was still, if somebody was worth $10 billion and their net worth was cut in half, they were still a multi-billionaire, and they didn't lose the need to service their homes. Maybe they rethought a few things in their portfolio, As far as properties or acquisitions, maybe they slowed their expansion a little bit. But other than that, we only lost a little bit of that down market because there was a huge boom from 2005, 2006 of people who were doing so great in the economy and real estate that they built themselves a very large home and needed staff, maybe for the first time. That group went away.
Yeah, that's more so who I'm pointing at right now, is also because you mentioned there's like those maybe couples that are both very successful in their careers, but they're not quite at this established level of wealth, but they're part of the industry growth. So maybe you see some slowdown there because people get a little bit more conscious about their expenses.
It's kind of a little bit of both sides. There might be a little slowdown in some of the full-time hiring at that level, but what we're seeing, and a trend I'm actually working with to develop with a new partner, is a lot of families are using home management companies and home management services that come from a number of different things. Estate managers and house managers who decided to fractionalize their offering rather than work for one family. They're providing a service as a business for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 10 families, depending on the needs. So we're seeing a bit of that. We're seeing technology companies that are trying to develop apps that help run the home and manage vendors, similar to an Angie's List, but all integrated into an application that can run the home, that has some people behind it. So you maybe have an account rep that you can call and help you work through vendor selection, household management tasks. And then, of course, very high-end household management companies. We're working with about a dozen across the country to understand their offerings and help them with best practices, help them with staffing now. And it's a really big opportunity, I'll call it, because nobody has it 100% right. And the quality level is on the rise and the demand is already there. It's almost just letting people know what's available and figuring out what the best offering is for them. But we think the trend is going to be most households of any kind of size are going to need to be professionally managed moving into the future.
And do you think that's based on the complexity of households? I mean, just the technology aspects of modern households is, I think, kind of through the roof. Like when you look at the server rooms of a regular house in our industry, it's quite astonishing, the level of thought and detail, and then all of the updates that have to be done on a regular basis. And then this doesn't speak to this anymore because of the latest updates. That's rather complex.
I agree totally. And I actually had a conversation with my partner this morning saying that I think household technology for the regular homeowner, like my wife and I, has gone beyond a point of making things easier. And now it's more of like almost a maker's workshop. You have to have 20 different devices. They're all great individually if you want to learn them and read the 700-page manual, but they're not yet talking to each other well, like you said. It's not obvious what to buy, who's going to install it, who's going to maintain it, who's going to keep up with the updates. The integration and the actual consumer end use, it's just a mess right now. So someone needs to be that go-to person. And historically, at the high end, that was the estate manager and the house manager. They used the Lutron system, and they used all the different smart home technologies and the integrated alarm system and the AV tech. They would handle it, but it was a dedicated person. So now we have all this available at another level in most homes. Who's going to manage it? That's where we think the big opportunity is. It's complex, and it's also the idea that people have that they've learned through apps. Like, if I want a pizza, I just touch the app and order a pizza, and it shows up at the door. It's kind of the Amazon effect. If something breaks with the air conditioner, where's the app that I just touch it and somebody fixes it? So we're needing an intermediary there. Is what's happening.
Yeah. Kind of going back, taking it back to the recession piece, there is something that usually happens in blue collar as well as white collar jobs, is that whenever the market tightens, salaries tighten too for some time before they expand again. Do you think that that is a trend that you're seeing in our industry too, that maybe over the next 24 months, salaries could tighten again after what I would say the last 2 years have been rather generous towards maybe the workers to attract them? Because as you said, it was harder to attract talent, and there's less talent. And by the way, I would also, after that, maybe like your thought on why do you think there is less talent in the pool? Because I know there is a bunch of chefs, for example, who would like to be in work, but it's always the chicken and the egg. They don't have the experience, but then the people that have the experience, they're in extremely high demand.
Those are two great areas to talk about. Number one, the fluctuation of salary levels. I would say, again, historically, thinking about what's happened up and down in the market, probably the best indicator is cost of living rather than the state of the economy. Supply and demand is obviously a factor, but like we've said, there's usually high demand, low supply when you're talking about really experienced professionals that an agency would work with and recruit for a high level employer. But the cost of living, that isn't getting affected right now. That's a conundrum of inflation versus recession, right? You've got all these high prices and cost of living. So somebody can't move to a Seattle or move to a San Francisco still. Even, let's call it Austin, Texas, has blown way out of proportion. So can you offer lower salaries because we're in a recession or the supply and demand has gone down a little bit? Not really, because it's just unaffordable. So that's been one of the biggest factors. And we've been through that over the last few years, like you said, working with clients in the Pacific Northwest where housing jumped 20 to 30%. Texas, Florida even has really jumped because it's just become a super hot spot for wealth. California has always been expensive, unfortunately. I know because I pay the bills here. So I think overall that's the biggest factor. You've got the supply and demand, you've got the economy, but ultimately it's cost of living versus where the job is happening.
I actually think that makes perfect sense. Even if I look at my personal reasoning at times, if you work in Manhattan and you're expected to be very close, I mean, the rent in Manhattan, I think the average rent right now is over $5,000. And that's, in certain parts that might be a one bedroom, not even or a studio, so.
Yeah, it's very difficult to live close to some of the wealthy areas. We have one of our favorite little stories or anecdotes with that is Santa Barbara, California. It's north of Los Angeles by about an hour and a half. And there are so many large, wealthy homes. But to call and ask for a housekeeper in Santa Barbara, probably one of the most difficult searches in the country. The affordability issue is just out of control. One of the examples of supply and demand versus cost of living is nearby where I live in Santa Barbara, California. It's north of Los Angeles by about an hour and a half, but the cost of living is so extreme that finding a housekeeper there is probably one of the most difficult searches in the country.
Yeah. So what are the markets right now where you see the highest demand? And I guess do you see any trends? For example, you mentioned Austin, Texas, which is a little bit of a newer or growing market. But besides maybe the Northeast, like we're all aware that there is a lot of concentration in New York and, kind of the Bay Area. Beside those areas, where do you see growing demand for our industry?
I think the more difficult areas where there's always going to be demand are the vacation homes. So let's say Telluride, Aspen, Sun Valley, some of the places in Texas, many vacation and now primary homes in Florida, very, very busy. We don't see too much activity in the Southeast, in the Carolinas and the Virginias, but Atlanta, again, is very strong. I think, those are some of the main markets. Maybe Las Vegas has picked up again. Outside of Los Angeles, there's a vacation area in Palm Desert and the Coachella Valley. That's where we actually work actively with one of our household management companies, a partner there. Very, very busy, very high demand.
And
the Pacific Northwest has really grown exceptionally.
After all those years of experience, what would you tell someone who is new to the industry? What sets an A player apart, or what really opens the door for somebody? Because everybody's facing the chicken and the egg problem. Let's say we're up and coming chef, but you come from the restaurant, or maybe you're really good and you don't even have that restaurant experience, but you don't have the household experience. You don't have anybody vouching for you yet. How do people best segment into the industry coming from more traditional chef background, maybe?
Yeah, on the chef side, it's a unique path. I think you can get a little bit lucky just on the reputation of your food and your skill set. What I tell chefs to do as a transition is to, first of all, try and talk to and network with other chefs who are in private service. That's the best, because you're going to get the recommendation at some point. Hey, maybe you could fill in for me. I'm going on vacation. Or maybe you can come over and work this event with me. Maybe you can help my friend. They have a catering company. What you're trying to do is get exposure to the environment where you want to work. So even if that means, working all day in a restaurant and then doing catering gigs at night, that's the bridge. You just need to start to build exactly what you said. Are there people who will vouch for my work in the private environment?
Yeah. And then once they're in the private environment, what do you think makes the best kind of workers? Like, what are families looking for when they're hiring? What sets people apart, maybe even in the interviewing process?
I can only go on past trends that I've seen. Number one is always going to be professionalism. So if you're a heavy drinker, you look sloppy, you're not clean in your kitchen, you're bossy or off-putting to other staff, you're arrogant, none of these star chef qualities like we see on TV are going to fit in the home. Yeah. There's really no such thing. Your only goal is to ask that exact question of the clients that you're serving. What is it that they want? What type of environment do they want? Do they want me to be seen? Is there an open kitchen? Is there a chef pantry? Is there a catering kitchen? Where do you want me to work? How do you want me to look and feel and touch your lifestyle? That's the most important. And that's very, very critical for a chef to even determine if that's a right fit for them. Because if you have a family that's going to restrict your style of cooking, restrict your ingredients, restrict your menu selection, and have you bouncing all over the world doing boring things, that might not be the job for you. It might be a foot in the door, and you sacrifice for a little while, but ultimately you need to find where your talent is of value to the clients that you're serving.
Yeah. I think that's the beautiful point that you made. It's like where you find that intersection. And I think that there are so many different families looking for it that chefs can find an intersection that feels natural to them.
Yeah, and that's very unique, again, to the whole private service industry, because the chef is an artist. They're not the standard business or service professional like some of the other roles. And we often have a little bit of fun with that, because not all chefs are great at the business and paperwork side. So helping them put together the representation of who they are on paper, that might take a little more work for someone like me. But when you understand their passion for the food, their skill sets, their abilities that they've demonstrated, especially if they've worked with other families, then you start to integrate the reality of who they are as a talent. What is their food like? What is their presentation like? Who are they as a personality fitting into the household? And those are obviously critical.
Yeah. So maybe for the chefs that want to take their game to the next level and want to make your life easier, what does a perfect maybe bio or CV presentation look like? If they wanted to give it to you in the way where you're like, wow, this is exactly what we need.
Yeah, I think there's an artist component there, so I wouldn't say there's a perfect representation. If you can show some of your own style, lots of photographs. I mean, digital media these days is so simple that if you're not taking a few snapshots of the great plates that you've created, maybe listing some of your own unique recipes, you don't have to give the obvious secrets, but giving an explanation of a unique dish that you created, a unique space that you worked in. I'm always impressed by people who have had to cook in a galley kitchen on a boat, because they're so limited and restricted. They have to get creative about how they accomplish everything. So stories like that, that just give a real sense of who you are in your art. Visually, it should be professional. Don't send bad and ugly photos of food, which can easily happen. I'm sure you've seen it. But take a little time to just, maybe it's a diary style, maybe it's a portfolio that you're keeping just like an artist would, where you're able to show the repertoire that you have. Maybe some dinner menus that you've been allowed, that have retracted names on them, that you've been allowed to have a copy of. Anything that's tangible, because that's what we're looking for with a chef. Like, what do you create? What is your product, in addition to who are you in service? I think that's really the higher end nuance of the presentation, because a standard resume is going to be important as well. So be clear about what you're looking for, where you've worked, and who's vouching for you as a reference. Very, very important in the basics. Show us your training. Show us that maybe the skill set that you have might also be important. Are you specializing in certain diets? Are you specializing in certain types of cuisine? Are there things you won't cook? If you're a vegetarian chef only and you won't handle meat, that's pretty important. So the basics all need to be included, of course, but then the artistic side is show us what your product looks like. Show us the care and quality and the enthusiasm you have for your food and the events and plates that you've done.
Yeah. Do you ever include maybe a short video of of the chef, or is that something that's well received by the families, or is that a step that's being, I guess, skipped?
Two answers to that. One is it would be phenomenal to have any type of clips of video, especially if you had some professional media of you in your environment. That would be amazing. We can always add links to that. We can always send video files. The existence of that is very low, however. Not a lot of people like to create video. I think it was probably 2015-ish that I had my number one failure on estate jobs. I tried to incorporate video, and I gave everyone the opportunity for free to record a preempted or a prompted video interview that had a couple of basic questions. It would be a format just like we're on here, but it would be somebody asking a basic question. They'd have a minute to respond and record the responses, and then that could be saved and linked to on the system. And I think we had about, I'm being generous if I say 4 people did it out of the many thousands that it was offered to. And they were horrible, by the way. We found out that if it's not a live back and forth, the interview format is horrendous.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I once had to do it for a client. It was, but it was part of they had a different business where they were already incorporating those things. So they just made it part of their housing stuff too. And they also had a full blown personality test. I think it took me 45 minutes just to get through the personality test.
Wow. Yeah, there's always been some surprise interview systems out there. We've had people with horror stories about going through 6 or 8 individual interviews, sitting through group panel interviews, having to do hours and hours of work on assignments and case studies and examples of types of documents that they would create. Almost like they had to do a whole assignment as a consultant just to get through the interview process.
Yeah.
The personality tests, the extensive background interviews and reference checking. It can be quite a process for some of the families.
Yeah. So what are some maybe of the oddest aspects to this that you've experienced, where you were like, I don't know, maybe it's an extensive personality test or an expensive, where you, the other day I heard someone where you had to first cook on the boat for the team on the boat. They would send pictures to the family itself. They were in the house and there was already a chef in the house. So you're just kind of qualifying, but you're already in full work. I thought that was a very interesting one. That's before you even get to interview with the actual family, but you already kind of hired just to do it on the boat, and you might get to do that for 4 weeks or so. What are some of the processes that I don't know, that were very outstanding to you in that regard, or different?
I think, fortunately and unfortunately, I've done this long enough. There aren't many surprises, and nothing could be considered odd because there's just so many variables. I think you hit on a good example. One of the most common and actually very recommended processes for a chef is to have a trial period. If you're not leaving another job and you are available to do so. I think I've lost your video again. Should we continue recording audio?
Yeah, but I'm here. It's recorded. Yep, it's all fine. All fine.
Okay, great. So the trial process for chefs is very natural. If you have the time to do it, and it should be agreed upon in advance, how much you're going to get paid, what your resources available are, your budget, your menu selections, A trial for a chef is really the only way to know whether someone likes your food, whether they like you working near them, and whether you like them, and whether everybody's going to enjoy moving forward. So to see that happen, yeah, not a surprise. It's very common. Some of the uniqueness of the situations might seem a little weird. I guess we could say that.
Yeah. So what are some of the parts of the industry that you're excited about looking at the next couple of years, ventures that you're personally working on? What are you currently excited about?
I just lost the last part of that. You said, what am I currently
excited about? What are the ventures you're currently working on, or what is kind of your personal outlook in this industry in the next couple of years?
It's an easy question to answer, because what I talked about earlier in the household and estate management services industry, everyone's trying to figure it out, from the highest level corporations on down. Walmart is trying to get inside the home with refrigerator delivery of groceries. Amazon's trying to get inside the home with Amazon Key program that allows packages to be delivered inside your home. They all want to be part of serving the family within their homes, because that's where all the personal spending is happening now. Estate management companies that figure out how to do high-level service with a very distinct set of offerings and do it really, really well are absolutely going to be the future of this business. We'll still always have the high-end personal services at the ultra-high net worth level. That won't go away, because the need for an entire staff in some of the more complex properties and lifestyles, that will always be there. But as we come down market just a little bit into the multiple homeowner, the professional couple, the larger home that people are tired of dealing with and don't have the knowledge, these are going to have to be managed professionally. And that's exactly where the future is headed. So what I'm seeing from the candidate side is, are you learning? Are you a professional in the many aspects of the job? Are you seeking training? Are you helping develop other people? Are you training others to be professionals in private service? This is what's going to set the superstars apart.
Yeah. So where can people connect with you? What's the best platform for potential candidates or people that might want to reach out to you to connect with you?
Well, that's very simple. Estatejobs.com is the main website where people can connect for opportunities with agencies throughout the world, plus private families who advertise directly. So if you're seeking opportunity, go straight there and fill out a profile. It's always free for job seekers to use. That's the best connection point to the industry as a whole for careers. Our personal website, or our agency website, is Domestic Placement Network, and that is dpnonline.com. And you'll find just a very clear set of instructions and some helpful articles on that site to go through an agency search. And whether you want to connect directly with our agency or you just want to be prepared to work with any agency, that's where you'll find the best information.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing all your industry wisdom with us. This was a different kind of conversation. Usually you were focused on the chef aspect and of the part. So this was very enlightening for us. Thank you so much for making the time.
I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to do what I've done best throughout my career, which is learn from professionals who actually do the work in the homes like yourself. And I've had some wonderful experience with chefs that really highlight the good parts of the business.
Thank you for joining us at the Private Chef podcast. If you know any highly skilled chefs that want to take their life to the next level, make sure to share this podcast with them. And if you enjoyed this episode, click subscribe and check out our upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening.